Everybody, welcome to the Frontline Club, and thank you for coming tonight. In a moment, I'll hand over to Jonathan Miller from Channel 4 News, who's chairing tonight's discussion. Before I do so, if I can ask you to switch your phones to silent, and when it comes to questions, if you can wait for the microphone, because we're broadcasting live. So, over to Jonathan.
I'll reiterate that. Thank you for coming tonight, everybody. Welcome to the Frontline Club. And tonight it is 51 days since the event in Chibok when Boko Haram attacked that secondary school and kidnapped more than 270 girls, 50 of whom later escaped, and 230 or more of whom remain out there somewhere in the bush. It was a shocking event, certainly in terms of its scale, and it threw an international spotlight on what was going on in Nigeria with Boko Haram. But as any Nigerian will tell you, this is something which has been going on for a very long time. The kidnaps, the bombings, the random attacks, the extreme violence is something which has visited Nigeria again and again over the past 5 years in particular. And it's left an awful lot of questions to be answered about this group. Who are they? How did they evolve? What do they actually want? How have their tactics changed in recent years? What are their affiliations? How close are they, for example, to Shabab in Somalia or Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb? What is the Nigerian government actually doing to try to rein them in and to combat them? And are they succeeding in this policy? And will they really ever be able to bring back our girls, as that hashtag campaign made famous? Now, a lot of questions, and tonight we have a panel here which I have every confidence has got a lot of the answers which we really need. It's quite a group, and I'd like to introduce them one by one here. The first, on my left, Fatima Akilu. It is an absolute delight to have Fatima here tonight. We persuaded her to delay her trip back to Abuja by 24 hours just so that she can be here tonight. She is an advisor to the National Security Advisor in Nigeria. She reports to the President's office. She is in counter-terrorism. She takes the more softly approach than the total war approach, which has been touted more recently. She is into counter-extremism and de-radicalisation campaigns, but she does, to some degree, I suppose, represent the government here tonight. So I'm sure you'll have lots of questions for her, and I hope she's got some answers for us. Next to her is Kayode. Now, Kayode Ogundemisi is he's a good governance campaigner. He's a voracious blogger and writer and commentator on African affairs, Nigerian affairs, and he's got plenty to say on Boko Haram. I was struck, we were joking earlier when I met him there about something I saw him quoted as saying in the Premium Times newspaper when he was arrested a few months back for taking pictures of an election commission. And he's quoted saying, "I took a long panoramic shot of the election commission building, faraway buildings they were, but the security agents accosted me. They seized my camera and made me delete my pictures." I think any cameraman or photographer who's ever worked in Nigeria or elsewhere will feel for Kayode in that. Got a few techniques we'll have to discuss about switching cards and tapes, Kayode, but it's a pleasure to have him here tonight. Next to him, Andrew Walker, who is a member of the, I think I'm right in calling it the Yubo tribe, of European, only one on the panel, but one whose work has shone. And I don't know if any of you have managed to read, as I did when I was in Nigeria recently, his analysis of Boko Haram. It enlightened me. He did it for this US Peace Institute for Peace. Yeah. And he answers actually in it many of the questions which I raised just now that we will be debating tonight. I thoroughly recommend that you do read it. And Andrew will have a book on Northern Nigeria published next year, I think. And then next to Andrew is Bala. Forgive me for looking at my notes here, but Bala Mohammed Liman is doing a doctoral thesis at SOAS. His remit is to study conflict and identity in Nigeria. So it's right on the money for what we're talking about tonight. He considers how history and group memory and suspicion and fear and all of these things are stirred up together with things like ethnicity and religion and combine in what Bala terms a culture of conflict, the very things, in fact, that Fatima is working to avert. So without further ado, I'm going to just get them engaged in discussing all of this, and I'm going to kick off with Andrew, because Andrew actually asks rhetorically in the analysis which he did, albeit a few years ago, what is Boko Haram? Who are they? What do they want?
Well, it's a long and torturous story, but basically Boko Haram as we know them now are the kind of group that has grown out of a collection of radical youth who were based at the Indimi Mosque in Maiduguri between 2002 and 2009. And what happened was that this very charismatic, very open and kind of clever person called Muhammad Yusuf basically gathered together a lot of people who were kind of around, who were not being served by the government, who were being excluded from work, from the society basically in general, and kind of brought them to him. And they created a community actually inside Maiduguri. They managed to buy some land and build a mosque. And he and his followers became increasingly more radical. He gave out on DVDs preaching and sermons that were becoming increasingly more and more anti-state. And when this basically inevitable conflict happened, there was a question about exactly how it happened, but I think there was a conflict between, a spark between him and the police, and some of their followers in Bauchi were killed, because they had a farm in Bauchi as well. And they were on their way to, a big group of them were on their way from Maiduguri to a funeral of some of their members, when they were stopped by the police. And under one of the more kind of frivolous stories I ever wrote about in Nigeria was the tightening of motorcycle helmet laws was leading people to wear calabashes on their head. But this tightening of the law, they were stopped under this tightening of the law, and they ended up fighting the police, and the government came down on them really, really hard, and they went on a rampage around Maiduguri for about 5 days, killing people. And then when the army came in, they pushed them out, and they were kind of scattered into away from the town and on the run. And then over the next 2 years, they came back very slowly, kind of building up again, doing these kind of hit-and-run attacks on police checkpoints, where they would drive up on a motorbike, shoot the policeman, grab their guns, and run away. And this built up and built up and built up. And they were building their connections with, possibly with other groups in either in Mali, in Algeria, which some of them say that that's where they went on after they were kicked out of Nigeria, and they then.
Well, can I pause you there?
Sure,
because this is a story. I mean, this could go on and on, but I mean, look, it's a story which I've discussed actually with Fatima yesterday. I had heard that there were political connections with Boko Haram, and that at some point the group became a very useful militia which was used to political ends by politicians. Can I ask you directly about that, Fatima, just pick up where Andrew left off, because I think it may have been around that time that happened.
Yes, absolutely. There are stories that at least Boko Haram, led by Mohammed Yusuf, who was one of the early leaders, did work with a state governor at the time and helped him to mobilize youth that were used for election purposes. When that happened, Boko Haram had not really taken up arms against the state. So they were preaching a kind of very extremist kind of Islam that the authorities were watching because it didn't fit into the model of Islam that's been practiced in Nigeria. And they did fall out after the elections with that particular governor. Initially, he had given one of their members a position as commissioner in his cabinet. So he was commissioner of religious affairs. When they fell out with the governor, Boko Haram really, in a way, started their campaign of terror, where they went on the rampage and they did attack authority figures, including police stations. And Mohammed Yusuf was declared wanted by Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, who was the president at the time. He was hunted down and he was captured and he was killed. After that point, the group went into hibernation. There was a leadership tussle. Abubakar Shekau, who was a lieutenant of Mohammed Yusuf, emerged as a leader, and they came back in 2010 and waged this jihad.
Let me pause you there then. Thank you for that. Kode, what a disaster. Some people say that Mohammed Yusuf was extrajudicially murdered by police, I understand, not military, by police in Maiduguri. Do you think that was actually the cause of what we now see today?
Yeah, I was actually quite touched with your description of Mohammed Yusuf using the sentence, he was killed. No, that was not what happened. This was a man captured by, let me just put it in perspective. This was a man captured by the law, by the army. They did a very good job. They interrogated him, got a mobile phone, and he spoke in a very, like any other person, calmly described his wife, made a human side of him, and then the military handed him over to the police, and what you would expect from any democratic state was to take him to court and bring him to justice. No, that didn't happen. He was shot, he was mutilated. Not just that, there were several other captured members of his organizations that were killed in a very ruthless manner that you would not expect any state to fight terror with the method of terrorism. So the video was sent around Nigeria, and a minority section of the populace, of course, Nigerians being victims of terror, people celebrated with the way people celebrated when Gaddafi was dragged on the streets of Libya. But a minority conscious few Nigerians said, look, this is not acceptable. And Boko Haram changed tactics. And without wanting to waste your time, it escalated into what we have today. Terrorism didn't start from Yusuf. It started way before even Boko Haram. We had Maitasene before then. But government then dealt with it decisively without tolerating anybody taking arms against the state. So partly you're right. The way the Nigerian government treated Yusuf provided a tool for the terrorists to recruit more sympathizers.
Bala, this is where I want you to come in, because in the subsequent years, 4,000 people have been killed in the past 5 years, I think, by Boko Haram probably, but probably an equal number killed by the Nigerian military, allegedly, in hunting them down. All this plays into the narrative that you write about and study. Can you give us your perspective on that?
I think Kaide probably says it. Mohammed Yusuf and his members were ruthlessly killed by the military. And this has been going on. When you talk to people in Maiduguri, they tell you that all this impunity by the military is nothing new. It keeps on going on. And it creates a lot of distrust between community members and the military. The military is supposed to come in to save them. So it allows the young youth to feel obliged to join groups like Boko Haram, where they feel much safer. And so that level of impunity has not, it has exacerbated the whole situation in the northeast. And that's why it's probably become a lot more difficult for the government to actually make headway in trying to address this whole insurgency. And until, I mean, the last Ambassador Galatari had a report which stated that part of the problem and why Boko Haram is still existing is because the military is carrying on extrajudicial killings. People are getting arrested randomly. And if you look at Abubakar Shako's video, when he, after abducting the girls, one of the things he said is that they've captured our women. You know, they've captured our women. Some of them are nursing mothers. And so we feel obliged to do the same to you. So it's become very personal now to some extent for Boko Haram. And they kill their members, they capture their women. So they feel that they have to pay the Nigerian government back in the same coin.
So, Fatima, has it shocked Nigerians really what happened with the girls, or was it just more of the same? Because I think a lot of people were really surprised at how long it took Goodluck Jonathan to actually do something or say something.
I think there's several things. From about 2013, Boko Haram's campaign of terror has escalated. In 2013, Boko Haram actually did attack several schools. One was an agricultural college where they lined up about 64 young men and slaughtered them. Another was a girls' school where they went in at night and lined up the girls and said, stripped them naked and said, all of you who don't have pubic hair, you can go. All of you who have pubic hair, you've reached the age of maturity, lined them up and slaughtered them. Then this year, again, there was another incident in a federal government school where they went in and slaughtered girls and locked them in a dormitory. So people had started to become, I mean, the level of trauma was pretty high in the general population. What was different about the girls was actually because they took these girls alive. It sparked public consciousness because you can do something about it. Whereas the students that had been killed in those schools, they were dead. You couldn't really do anything about it. And that's part of the thing that sparked the campaign. And also because you had a lot of activists who had been working in the field of girls' education for many years, so it resonated with them in a way that maybe the burning of the villages had not resonated for those particular activists.
So then, sorry, and just follow on with what I originally asked. So why did it not seemingly resonate with the president?
Well,
why was he so out of kilter with that feeling of trauma that you describe others feeling?
I think the response was slow. If you look at what had happened around the abduction of the girls, there were 2 bombings in Abuja, the seat of the capital, within days of that. So in Nigeria, I think it's almost every day either a major cleric is assassinated by Boko Haram or a village where 100 people assassinated. It's almost a daily occurrence for us. And I think when the girls were taken, it was really looked at as one of those events by Boko Haram. But it didn't mean that there was not a sense of urgency, because the military were tasked to go out and look for the girls from day one.
I think there was a sense of urgency on the side of the president that it was so urgent that it took him 2.5 weeks to actually acknowledge the disappearance of this girl. Look, let's be factual. I come from a country where we are 160 million and we have 160 million Nigerians in denial. And the president of the country is a reflection of the people of the country. Till the first 2 weeks, the presidency did not believe that these girls were missing. In fact, the official propaganda machine of the presidency was to tell the people that the girls were not missing. It was so bad that the First Lady, who had no constitutional power to summon government agents, dragged government official agents and security officials to her palace in the presidency and interrogated these officials. And the line of questioning was like doubts. Are you sure the girls are missing? How come you don't have the photographs? You know, and that is a reflection of the president, of the presidency. And if you have a government that in the first place did not believe that these girls were missing, you do not expect them to take any action. And it's not about these girls. this is a government that didn't believe that Boko Haram were causing enough havoc in northern Nigeria. When 600 people are killed, the official figures are reduced to 30. When 10,000 villages are wiped out in northern Nigeria, even when Amnesty International showed satellite images showing this village before and after Boko Haram attacks, the government kept saying Amnesty International was doctoring satellite from pictures about Nigeria. So the main reason why the government did not react is not because they don't have the capacity to react, but we are dealing with a government that is in denial. And for as long as it's going, because look at it, we are...
Okay, Cody, wait one sec, and I want to get back to you two in a second. I'll put this straight to Fatima, though. Government in denial. You're shaking your head.
I am shaking my head because I know that I did say that the response was slow, but I went to Borno myself almost 3 days after those girls were taken. I was with the military and they were pursuing those girls. They were following multiple leads.
But parents were telling us journalists in Abuja that the military wasn't doing anything in the Sambisa forest. They were having to go there themselves to try to find their girls.
I was at the edge of the Sambisa forest with the military who had just returned from Sambisa forest. The military might not have been in Chibok where the girls were, but after they were abducted, they were no longer in Chibok.
So you believe Goodluck Jonathan is misrepresented and misunderstood, and that actually a lot more is going on behind the scenes than we could ever give them credit for?
I absolutely know that a lot is going on underneath the scenes that people do not know. And one of the things that I know for a fact, because I was there, was that there was a concerted effort to find those girls from the very day that they were missing, because I was there in Borno. I saw the efforts that were being made.
Can I just disagree with her on some of the things she said? I mean, sense of urgency, I don't think there was a sense of urgency. I don't think... I mean, President Obasanjo gave an interview a couple of days ago where he mentioned the fact that the presidency knew 12 hours after these girls were abducted that they were abducted, but the presidency refused to believe that they were. And it took him 18 days for him to set up a committee. I mean, if that's a sense of urgency, I mean, please, because a committee just doesn't do anything, and Nigerians are used to these kind of committees that end up doing nothing. There was no sense of urgency, and the girls that were abducted were not the first. I mean, the number is huge, and maybe that's what brought out the outcry. But even as recently as April, or just before the girls were abducted, Amnesty International's report and Human Rights Watch have actually mentioned the fact that girls were being abducted. So it's not as if they were being killed. They were being abducted. 20 girls were abducted before this 250.
Well, Nigeria's own Human Rights Commissioner reported that.
So the girls were steadily being abducted because, like Andrew said in his article, Boko Haram changed tactics and were now focusing on soft targets. And abduction of girls was part of that strategy now. So this was not a new phenomenon, you know, it was something that had been happening. But government has refused to accept, and like Kayode says, government is living in denial. They refuse to accept that Boko Haram is as bad a problem as it is.
Okay, poor Fatima is the lightning rod here. But Andrew, let me ask you something here. You've studied this group. What you've all said has documented its evolution, its progression from a spiritually led Islamist organisation to a virtually anarchic cult of extremists who are kidnapping and killing children. Can you negotiate with a band of outlaws like that?
It's a very difficult question. There have been negotiations in the past. I mean, there have been times when there has been some give and take. I mean, we were saying about the wives that were released. I mean, there was a previous release of some people who were held by the government in return for what we're not entirely sure.
But by Boko Haram?
No, by the government.
By the government.
Released some of their wives and children. So, I mean, and there have been talks of, some contact between the government and the group. It's never really sure who you're talking to, whether that's the full totality of the group. Because of the way it's arranged, it's split into different sections, and it's very difficult to organise how to get to these people. And I think one of the biggest problems about this whole group is that they are a kind of unknowable, empty space in this remote place now. They've moved out of my degree. They're in this remote part of Nigeria. And all of these fault lines that we're kind of talking about indirectly kind of go through this empty space, and they are the kind of, it's this impenetrable, unknowable thing that we don't know how Boko Haram organize themselves. We don't know how they tell themselves whether they're spiritual or not. And it's difficult for people who are outside the presidency here, all of us looking on at the presidency, to kind of understand what is going on and how to kind of get in there and do anything. So, I mean, it's not entirely...
Well, the indications are that negotiations are happening. Fatima, would the government do a prisoner exchange? I mean, the Americans would never do that sort of thing.
I think where we are now is that we're putting many cards on the table. I think the priority for the government is really to get the girls back alive. And we are hopeful because from the videos that have been released in recent times, they have shown that at least those girls that they have shown are still alive. So there is a chance. As Andrew said, the government has negotiated with Boko Haram before, and the government has been dealing with Boko Haram for a long time, many, many years. Boko Haram is almost 15 years old. So they didn't really start today, even though they have transformed and transmuted into this guerrilla movement now, but at least in the past.
So would they do a prisoner exchange?
I think they have all the options on the table, and they will continue to talk to Boko Haram.
What's your advice to the president as one of his national security advisors?
To continue to talk to Boko Haram, and there must be a solution where the girls will be delivered safely back to their parents. I think what they are asking for, I'm not sure exactly what they're asking for this time, but in the past when there's been negotiations, what Boko Haram has asked for is the release of their commanders and their members that are in jail, the rebuilding of their mosques, the rebuilding of their schools, and the release of their wives and children who are not in prison. They are actually being rehabilitated in Borno State through the state government. So those are the things that they have asked for.
So well, let me go on to Kaida, because that there are really genuine things to negotiate over here, things that actually there might be a bit of give and take over.
It will be, first let me say, Nigeria is at a state now where the government of the country and the country in itself is powerless. If you're going into a negotiation table, you go from the point of strength. The state in itself has reached a collapse stage, and that gives the terrorists an impetus of, you can't negotiate with people whose main demand is to Islamize Nigeria. That is the goal of Boko Haram. And how you're going to sit down with animals, really?
But hang on a second, are there not factions within? Are the old Yusufia...
I'm coming to that. The first thing a government will do is to show the might as a government. Stop the corruption, empower the military, give them adequate protection. We spend £6 billion every year. I hope Fatima is not getting from that money. I don't think so. But we spend £6 billion every year on our military. And this is a military that we see on TV saying, look, I have to bribe the armory department to get another round for my AK-47 to fight a terrorist that gets supplies from every part of the world. So this is a country with £6 billion on armament and a terrorist group that makes money from kidnapping, having more superior firepower than the state. So the first priority is for the state to enforce itself as a state. Then you go into the negotiation table with the elements that wants to negotiate and crush the ones using only legal means, those who don't want to negotiate.
Can I just stop you a second and just ask something very specific to explain to me and everyone here what is meant by the term vested interests in Nigeria? These vested interests which supposedly prevent the government actually achieving anything when it comes to dealing with Boko Haram?
Boko Haram is like McDonald's, a franchise. Boko Haram it's a franchise, and every segment of the ruling elite use Boko Haram for their different interpretations. The government in itself, you have to understand how divided Nigeria is. So the government, when it suits it, say Boko Haram is some enemies, some political opponents sponsoring terrorist group. Then when it doesn't suit the government, the president goes to the church. Actually, Boko Haram is some Muslim elements who wants to radicalize, who wants to take over the South. Then when it suits his international posturing, he goes to France and said, Boko Haram is Al-Qaeda, which is actually the real position. And then you have in the opponents of the president who wants to capture power. And they just fold their hands and say, look, that's your problem, deal with it. So those are the kind of vested interests. And then you have a populace in itself, depending on which region, who says, Boko Haram is just a northern problem. That's it, they've been in power for 50 years. Serves them right, you know? And those are the kind of vested interests until we first identify ourselves as the common target of this terrorist group. That by the time they finish with Jonathan and those in the ruling elites, they will start dealing with poor people in southern Nigeria. And that is why it's sad these girls were kidnapped, but it brings the message closer to southern Nigeria.
Bala, what a mess.
Total mess, I think.
Would you concur?
Yeah, I would concur with most of what he said. It's very true. I mean, I think Boko Haram has, more than anything else, brought out the huge divisions within Nigeria. And like he said, there are different narratives that sort of emerge from different sections of the country. I mean, last week I was talking to somebody from Nigeria and he says he heard that Boko Haram was a creation of Ibrahim Babangida. I mean, those are the kind of things that, I mean, that sort of emerge. There's always been this belief that Boko Haram is a northern problem, something created by northern politicians because they're unhappy that the presidency has gone to the south. And I think the presidency took that backseat as saying, okay, this is not our problem. It's not a Nigerian problem, it's a northern problem. And they will sort it out themselves. And unfortunately, that has allowed Boko Haram to breed and grow and mutate into what it is today. And until the government starts to say, look, this is, like Kada says, this is a problem that will engulf everyone, then this problem will go away.
Please make a comment on that, but also take it on, because I want to just turn this around a little bit here in a second about what to do about it. And you've got some answers there, I think.
I think so. Just to answer some of the things that you're saying, what really happened was that there was a lack of understanding of what Boko Haram was and who they were. When they began 15 years ago, I think they would, in a way, fill in that gap that occurred with the collapse of the Soviet Union. You had a lot of people who were hearkening for a different social order, who really didn't want to live under a capitalist democratic regime, and they turned to religion. That was really the initial genesis of the young people who were agitating and hearkening for change. Unfortunately, what happened was that the change that they wanted did not occur, and they eventually emerged into this group that is now known as Boko Haram. But the fault lines in Nigeria have been there for decades. They've been there for probably as long as you and I have been alive. So to say that all that Boko Haram did is to make them clearer, but it's not a creation of Boko Haram at all. These fault lines across religion, across ethnicity, across region have been there for a long time. The collapse of certain sections of the state have been in Nigeria for decades, including the education system. So what we need is to build those systems rather than looking and approaching and blame. I know that we were slow to respond, only because we did not educate people early enough in terms of the threat that they were facing. And in terms of what we're doing.
Well, actually, just let's get on to that in a second. Andrew, I want to just pick up something with you, because in your analysis, which I was talking about earlier, one of the things which we haven't really touched on that much, we've talked about ethnicity issues and we've talked about religion. You talk about deprivation and poverty, and I was really struck by how I found myself up in Maiduguri. I mean, you go outside Maiduguri a little bit and I get the impression nothing's changed in hundreds of years. It's very, very poor. And it's probably one of the poorest parts of the Muslim world. And this deprivation and high levels of illiteracy presumably fuel recruitment to a cause like Boko Haram's.
I think, yeah, I mean, the relationship with the economics of the whole situation are complicated because Boko Haram themselves don't really have anything to say about economics. They don't have a position that they say, you know, if other than once we establish true Sharia, everything will be all right. I mean, presumably, if people are still poor under that, well, it's God's will, you know. And that's so they don't actually say anything about economics. But it's undeniable, I think, that the person who I spoke to, who'd been arrested by the police, who was, you know, a member of Boko Haram, he had been, until they came to find him, you know, selling, pushing like a hardware cart around the street, selling like padlocks and rubber bands and, you know, this kind of small plumbing supplies from a cart, making maybe 2,000 naira, like what, £8 every month kind of thing, or maybe a week. And you know, that was really what his situation was. And he was approached by some people who were not of that same situation, who were obviously from the level above, who, you know, maybe they're not able to move up in their own sphere because of their own the other kind of blockages that happen around in the economy, but they're the ones who are driving this this insurgency. And they took him, gave him you know, a car to ferry guns with, and made him their mule, basically. So you've probably got the kind of people who are excluded at a kind of middle class level, driving it in a kind of leadership positions, and then using poor people who, you know, just really.
So, Cody, if Nigeria, I mean, we're talking about Africa's biggest economy, possibly richest country. I don't know if it's the same thing, but I mean, like, you know, there's a lot of oil wealth in Nigeria. If that wealth had been better distributed, would you have had this problem?
Absolutely not. To put it in perspective, Nigerians, okay, I've always been accused of saying negative things about Nigeria. I've got good news for you. That is, Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa, which is good news. And the news the World Bank would want you to hear. But the sad part of that good news is that almost 80% of that population, of almost 80% of the 160 million people, are living under $1 a day. And a chunk of that population are based in northern Nigeria. Not just that, a chunk of the population that are improvised, are living below $1 a day, who are based in northern Nigeria, let's face it, are Muslims. In northern Nigeria, the population in the north is predominantly Muslim. And when there's poverty, it's easy for me as an Islamic scholar to go to a large poor population and preach adulterated versions of Islam to them, and provide them with basic things the state will not provide them with, and then bring them into terrorism. Now, in this country, in the United Kingdom, to bring it very close to home, there's a Nigerian politician who is in British jail as a result of corruption in the Niger Delta. But what you don't have is his version, his counterpart in northern Nigeria, brought to justice, until we start picking up corrupt politicians in all parts of Nigeria, bringing them to justice, recover the oil wealth and the wealth of our nation, and engineering the proceeds to better the life of our people. We'll continue to have Boko Haram, and we're thinking of Boko Haram today. In the Niger Delta, as we speak today, the militants are getting arms into the country. I'm not sure if my sister is aware of the fact that the militant who was carrying a gun against the state some few years ago is actually the minister in charge of the naval, of the territorial waters of our country. So it's got easy passage to arms coming from Eastern Europe to keep against, in case his man, who is the president today, loses in 2015, he's got more than enough arms to start his own movement. So we need to start facing the core of the issues and not color it.
I think the thing is that the most, I mean, you have this group in a very remote place of the country. That's one thing. The real existential danger to Nigeria is the chauvinistic narratives that have sprung up around it. And it's this kind of seed of chaos which has just been dropped in the pond, basically. It's a seed, like a massive boulder of chaos, just been dropped in the pond. And all of these splits that Fatima has talked about.
But hang on, Nigeria's been here before. I mean, you know, it's the anniversary of the Biafra conflict now. And the general who commanded that, or the former head of state, General Gowon, he said recently that, or he opined that Nigeria was back again in a state of full-scale civil war. And that's a quotation. Do you think that that is the case?
I think so. I think we're headed towards that. The level of insecurity in the country is just way too much now, you know. And like Kayode mentioned, I mean, the state, the Nigerian government doesn't have the power to effectively secure its borders. You know, it's lost control of so many areas in Nigeria, and it's not just northern Nigeria. In the south, the militants have threatened that they will pick up arms again and they will blow up more pipelines to cripple the Nigerian government. So we have these pockets of chaos in all different parts of the country. It's just a recipe for disaster.
Fatima Akilu, you are sitting here as a representative of this government, which is under intense fire. Now, you do have solutions, and you're not of the total war. You're not a proponent of the total war idea. Can you run through for us how you avert the sorts of disasters which we've heard predicted here?
Absolutely. I don't agree that we are in a state of civil war. I think that last year, when the military pushed back Boko Haram, we were not having these kinds of discussions. They were very successful in containing them within one area and pushing them way back into Sambisa Forest, and normalcy to a certain extent returned in the northeast, because I traveled through the northeast in that time. But in spite of everything happening, we see opportunities. We see opportunities to change society, to change some of those fault lines that you talk about. This is the time for us to come together, and we are developing platforms. We must look at education, how we're educating our kids, what we're teaching our kids within their education system. We have now in Nigeria put education on the top of our national security priority, as a priority area to look at. There are many things that have caused problems for us in the way that we educate children. One is the way that we teach religion in schools. A lot of Christians only learn about the Christian religion, and similarly a lot of Muslims only learn about Muslim religion, because a lot of them go to faith-based schools. So there's no meeting point. And so we are trying to ensure that our kids are taught multiple religions. They're also taught tolerance, and that the school is used as a tool to counter violent extremism. And to do that, you have to train a whole human being. You have to give a lot of spaces and opportunities for youth. In Nigeria, we currently have a one-track education system, which really sort of feeds into a liberal arts education at the end of it. So there's a lot of aspirations for going to university. There's not enough university places, and there's not enough jobs for those who cannot climb that ladder. So we've got to look at a vocational track. We've got to make opportunities in terms of apprenticeship, lots of different programs. So that's one platform. We're also looking at issues to do with faith. What is going on interfaith within the religions? And don't be under any illusions that this is a problem of Islam. There are problems with Christianity as well in Nigeria. So we're looking at both faiths, what's going on within those faiths, and also across faiths. There's the issue of poverty that you mentioned. There is now a big initiative called the Presidential Initiative for the Northeast, which is a socio-economic development plan. It's also an infrastructural development plan. It's also a complementary plan to the ones that the governors themselves are initiating in the Northeast. So we're hoping that it will create a lot of jobs for youth. In addition, we're trying to de-radicalize members of Boko Haram. We have about 1,000 of them in our prisons. And we have developed a de-radicalization program for them. And we have also developed an aftercare program. We are hoping that as a result of all these negotiations, we know for a fact that they are members of Boko Haram who were adherents of Mohammed Yusuf, who are now saying that they don't have tolerance for the direction that Sheikh Hope is taking them into, and they want safe passage to leave the group. We must provide them that safe passage, and we're working on it. The reason why they need safe passage is that Boko Haram attacks every member that disengages. And what we're finding more and more now is the communities don't want them back, because the Boko Haram has descended into this kind of animalistic kind of group. So they are trapped in a no man's land with nowhere to go. So we are looking at how do we keep them safe, how do we provide them programs if they decide that they want to embrace peace. At the same time, we're looking at community engagement. How do we stop the tide of radicalization? So these are long-term plans, but very important. If the military campaign is successful, what we want is we don't want a next generation of young people who, for reasons to do with certain failures on our part where we haven't provided enough spaces for them for their self-actualization needs or education or jobs, that they find a charismatic leader an viable alternative. So we are putting together multiple programs in the community on a platform that we call our counter-radicalization. And it's a program in 6 states. And these states were chosen because we felt that they were the most at-risk states in that they have been attacked mostly by Boko Haram, and the Boko Haram have had cells that we know of in those states. We're also looking at how we do strategic communication, both in terms of public diplomacy and in terms of military. And we are developing post-traumatic stress capability across the country. Even though it's taken for granted in countries like the UK, we don't have a pool of psychologists waiting. There aren't that many psychologists. And what we're trying to do is to incorporate psychological services within our mental health policy to make sure that we are able to train a generation of counselors who will deal with trauma that seems to be increasing in our society. And we have got a pilot in Kano State, which has been working pretty well.
Wow. So if anybody thought there wasn't a plan afoot, okay, I'm so delighted there aren't any other journalists here tonight because I've got some very good news lines from that. So look, and let me,
very briefly,
go on then, yeah.
On top of all those very laudable things, which I hope, come to pass, unfortunately, without institutions of state which are to some degree trustable and who can act as arbiters of these kind of disputes, police, courts, all this kind of stuff, unfortunately all of those things will be temporary.
Okay. Before we go to questions from those assembled here, 2 responses initially from Yukad and Bala.
No.
Do you buy it? Come on, it's very easy to be a critic.
No,
here are ideas.
I was transformed from this all and taken into some abyss.
Utopia, yeah.
And I was thinking, wow. As in, if I'm still in a state of shock, really. If the very laudable rhetorics I've just heard now,
Harsh. It's a plan.
Oh, yeah, okay. Are the same rhetoric that's coming from my president, the Minister of Defense, the National Security Advisor, not the advisor to the National Security Advisor, and those in power, the Senate President. Of course, any patriot would support these laudable plans. But what we are talking about is reality. As we sit in this hall today, over 270 girls are in the bush in Sambisa, within the territory of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And the spokesperson of the president, who speaks for the president, is saying Americans were kidnapped in Tehran, and that went on for 1 year. Tehran is in Iran. Sambisa is in Maiduguri, in Nigeria. The immediate solution, first one, I don't know if my sister knows about it. Even the Nigerian army does not know the number of arms within its armory. First, account for the number of ammunitions you have in your armory. Take stock of the number of MiG fighters. We have 6 functional jets that were commissioned 30 years ago. Replenish this stock. Chad, a small, tiny country behind us, militarily is more functional than Nigeria in the air. As we speak today, Nigeria does not even have a air defense system. Those are immediate solutions. Empower your military. France cannot think of attacking Britain because there will be consequences. There will be there's a sort of balance of power. Boko Haram knows if it attacks Nigeria, Nigeria cannot attack back. So the immediate solution is empower the military. Now,
don't give the French ideas. Okay.
Now, the other thing is corruption is the core of the issue. Look, let's be frank. There was a poll that says Nigeria is the second most corrupt country after Pakistan. That is untrue. That's actually rigged.
Why Nigerians?
Corruption is the core of the issue. Look, when money is not going to those institutions, when you deprive the electoral body from organizing free and fair election, you deprive your military from the basic needs to fight terrorism, you deprive the judiciary from the needs to enforce, to interpret the law, you deprive the communities from basic things as a playground for children to express themselves, you're going to have the same pressure. So the immediate solution is stop corruption, fill the military with what they need, and then all these long-term plans, we can now put it on the table and have a debate about it and see how viable they are. Right now, Nigeria needs help internationally. We are a nation on our knees. And I'm not proud to say that as an anti-war person. But I don't care if the devil comes to liberate those girls from the bush. We need help right now. And these theories about, the president told us he built schools in Maiduguri, they call them Almajiri schools. Girls cannot even study in normal schools. Who is going to go to an Almajiri school? We need to restore the confidence of our people in northern Nigeria and take this as a Nigerian problem. Then we can move forward from there.
Okay, fine rhetoric there from Kode. And final point before we go throw it more open. Bala, you talk about this, what's the term? Sorry, it's just escaped my mind. The conflict.
Culture of conflict.
Pardon? The culture of conflict.
Yes.
Kode has talked about a nation on its knees. Can the culture of conflict be cured?
I mean, her plans, the plans that she's laid out are actually quite laudable. But I think the level of distrust is so deep now. It's a generational change.
The level of
distrust and suspicion,
yeah.
Distrust and suspicion between different groups in Nigeria is so deeply entrenched now. It's going to take a couple of generations to actually reverse this delegitimization that is going on between different parts of the country. So it's something that we all hope will happen, but it needs to happen very fast, you know. And just to take up on her plans, I mean, she's talked about trying to rehabilitate 1,000 Boko Haram members and so on and so forth. But the recent report by the Norwegian Refugee Council said 3.3 million Nigerians are internally displaced within the borders of Nigeria. And in this year alone, over 400,000 people were displaced in the northeast of Nigeria. And obviously that means that something is still wrong in the plans that they have laid out, because people are still having to leave where they live because Boko Haram has just taken over most of these areas.
Yeah, people are fleeing into Niger and Chad as well, yeah. Okay, I'm sure there are many here who want to ask questions. Their hands are going up already. Let's take them one at a time. Yes, at the back now. Okay, I will swivel around. But yes, grab the microphone. It's coming to you there from the back. And keep. If you could just introduce yourself and keep your question brief, if you would.
Sure. Hi, my name's Millie. I'm not from any organisation, just here out of pure interest. My question is to Miriam. You talk about the long-term goals and kind of what your plan is and the government's plan. What would you say the short term is in terms of, obviously, westernised countries as a whole don't agree with negotiating with terrorists, and yet you talk about you would go to any extent to get the girls back. I just wonder what the short term is. Thank you.
Okay.
So was that addressed to Fatima, yeah?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe you're asking short-term plans only in relation to the Chibok girls, right? The short-term plans, I think what we have said as a country is that we would put everything on the table. So there have been back channels of communication with Boko Haram to see what their demands are and what the government is willing to give. A negotiation really is a dialogue. So you give a bit, somebody gives a bit, and you come and meet in the middle. So they are in this process of negotiation, but we have ruled out a military option. That is not an option for the country right now.
Gentleman here in the middle, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. The name's Ewan Grant, former intelligence analyst with Customs and Excise. Maybe it's time, in view of what the panel have said, to dust down an update by BBC Radio 4's File on 4, or maybe an opportunity for Channel 4 to follow up the File on 4 of 15th of January last year. My question is, in relation to the army personnel who I understand have just been convicted, or is it prosecuted, for supplying weapons and doubtless other things to Boko Haram. Are they the kingpins of this leakage, or are they scapegoats, or are they somewhere in between?
Okay, thank you. Just to let people know we're all on the same page here. What that is you're aware, yeah?
The military just came out and said that this is
Well,
true.
I think
It's not true.
Yeah, the military.
Okay, hang on a second. There was a report which was it stems from a Nigerian publication. It was in today's Times that 10 military officers were accused of generals, and senior officers accused of supplying weapons to Boko Haram. This is an allegation which you hear often, not just in terms of weapons, but also of the military being involved in skimming off the rather large counterinsurgency budget. So you're saying the report is not accurate?
The military denied. They said earlier today, the spokesperson for the military said 10 generals were not involved. But what is truth, what is actually factual, is that in the past, the late National Security Advisor to the president, this president, was indicted by a commission set up within the military for supplying arms to Niger Delta militants. And these are statements of fact. So it's not unusual for Nigerian army personnel officers and policemen to supply armed robbers and terrorists with guns, because there is a precedent. In that particular case, members of the armed forces, including senior officers in the military, were convicted. They were found guilty of supplying the Niger Delta militants with arms and anti-aircraft missiles to fight the state. But in this particular case, like every other thing, has been denied. So let's take it that.
Well, it wouldn't be the first story to be denied that was actually true. But it's the most worrying, one of the most worrying stories that I've read about.
There are no 10 generals.
No 10 generals. He did agree.
Okay, but Fatima, it is fair to say that there are long-standing allegations that there are those in the military with sympathy for Boko Haram, that there are those that war is profitable,
of course,
and that money has been made, and that there are politicians perhaps as well with political interests in seeing the president fail in his pursuit of bringing back the girls.
So I don't deny that. The only thing that I'm saying is that the story that there are 10 generals being court-martialed is not true, but there are other officers that have been court-martialed for complicity with the Boko Haram group.
How serious a problem is this sort of corruption?
Well, I think it's serious enough for the army to be court-martialing its members. There have been incidences of when some officers have passed on information. But as I said earlier when I was speaking, Boko Haram has been around for a decade and a half, and their ideology did resonate initially across the whole society. So inevitably, they are soldiers that believe in that ideology, just as they are civil servants and teachers and people in all walks of life.
But this is a good example of how these chauvinistic narratives come out of this situation. You have a newspaper report which is slightly dodgy, no one really knows what's going on about it. Is it the truth? No, it's not the truth. Yes, it is the truth. Okay, are those 10 generals, where are they from? They're from the north. Okay, right, this is done, the panel that's being done is headed by an Ijor guy from South. Then people start saying, well, this was true last time when this happened, and then this is how the things accrue and build up and build up and build up, and then suddenly what was one thing has now become another.
Ewan, thank you for raising that one. Yes, gentleman, blue shirt. There's a microphone coming.
My question is about that. In conflicts between nation-state and nation-state, there's an underlying feeling that it always has to come to an end. How do you end a conflict between a nation-state and a non-nation group of people? Is it like UK and Ireland? Is there any suggestions that you will compromise, that you will have amnesty or stop? Because this conflict is common throughout the world.
Can I put that one? Would you like to hear Bella's response to that? I think it's right up your street.
Sounds like a PhD thesis. But, this is Boko Haram is an insurgency, a terrorist group, and if you look at Afghanistan and Iraq. These things haven't ended. I mean, the Americans have been in Afghanistan for over 10 years, and it's still ongoing. So these are very tricky terrains when you're trying to negotiate how to end. Because even if Boko Haram, its demands are met, which I don't think all of the demands can be met, do you leave a group that has terrorized the country to live peacefully in a settlement in Maiduguri? I mean, it doesn't make sense. You know, they just have a piece of land where they farm and everybody says everything's fine. It can't end like that. You know, so we just have to wait and see how it plays out. But I doubt if it will end peacefully. And like the Metatini one, they had to be completely routed out of Kano. And most likely that is what has to happen.
But there is something which some of the other questions have touched on, if you don't mind me sort of digging into your question a little bit, is that there are factions within Boko Haram. There is the Yusufia group of the purists who seem to be wanting to do a deal.
Yeah, but like Fatima said, most of them the stories are that most of them get slaughtered like animals when they try to leave the group. They actually slaughter them. So the core ideological group that maintain that this is what we want, and anybody that sort of deviates from that is seen to be an enemy, and their blood is not sacred.
I think I'll borrow one of Arafat's statement, which says the person you negotiate with is your enemy. If there's a conservative element who is not causing a threat to the state, why are you negotiating with them? They're already won over. The real problem at the core group, which is the Shekau group, is how do we penetrate that group? And it sounds hawkish until we have superior firepower to the point where superior firepower, enough intelligence within the military. Because before now, as a student in the University of Jos, we had a state security, which is the equivalent of the secret police in the UK, would embed, with criminal elements to get information. The state security and we have the national intelligence agencies who would have embedded with the terrorist group to get information. But the level of distrust, even within the security apparatus, is so bad, which is a reflection of the society, that no one wants to die for the country and go and embed with a terrorist group. So until we have that superior line where the commander-in-chief becomes really the commander-in-chief.
And the commander-in-chief is the president.
Is the president of the country. He controls the army, the military, the police, and show the strength. Then radical elements within the Shekau groups will look at the end game and like, look, we have no choice than to get out of this group and isolate the core terrorist group.
I think there are many ways that terrorism ends. And let's not forget the fact that Shekau himself did come to the table on two separate occasions where he did want to negotiate safe passage or peace. So he could get tired, he could get cornered, and there could be an insurrection within his group, because already there are factions that are emerging within the group who are unhappy with his leadership.
I've heard this, that there is a conflict fatigue, if you like, that may have set in some respects.
I think the important thing to remember as well is that this is not the first time this has happened. This is over the last 200 years. There are groups which rise up, come down, fall. And what's different happening is that this is happening now in a certain international political kind of milieu where the nation state is even more complicated than it has ever been, and what you're looking at is, probably going to happen is that over a couple of generations of leadership, that this group will kind of fizzle out and will be not.
Okay, there are a few more questions we'd like to get in. Okay, first of all, in the comfy sofa over here on the left, first of all, and then this lady in the front row. Then we'll move across to this side.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Jameson, former resident of God's own country. There's one angle I'd like to ask your views on. I'm not sure it's been explored sufficiently. There's been a great emphasis on what the federal government should be doing. But in the north, there are some very powerful leaders. We have governors who have been fomenting the problem. we have very prominent individuals, Babangida, Buhari, Dangote, and we have the emirs of Kano and Sokoto, etc. What on earth do you think they should be doing to contribute to the solution of this problem?
Thank you.
I think that is actually the official narrative of a faction of the Nigerian government that they push out to the international community to say the people behind this crisis are Babangida, Buhari, and those names you mentioned, who particularly come from the northern part of the country. By the way, I'm from the southern part of the country. Who come from the that narrative feeds into the base of the presidency, which is from the south of the country. Now, if you've identified these people as the ones causing the trouble, as a president empowered to rule the country, should they not be in court? Should they not be facing trial? Now, that is actually you're pushing people who would help you, who would naturally help you, away. I don't think, in all honesty, I think in northern Nigeria, should the leadership in northern Nigeria do more than what they are doing now? Yes, they should. They're not doing enough. But you also look at the structure of Nigeria. In the UK, the police commissioner in London does not have power over the police in Hertfordshire. In Nigeria, the governor, as it is a governor in name. He is not the chief security officer of his state. He has no control over the police. He has no control over the army. Power is so centralized on one man, and it's beyond the ability of a man to direct the army of a nation as huge as Nigeria. So we really need to look at the structure.
And particularly Sokoto under emergency rule, I think, isn't that true?
Under emergency rule. Even now, in those 5 states, they are under the control of the president, technically, because there's a state of emergency.
Okay, let's just keep it short. I want to go to Fatima on this one, just briefly.
Can I just add, you know, because you mentioned that some of these powerful emirs should actually do something. But just a couple of days ago, a couple of emirs were attacked in
the 3 emirs travelling together, and the emir of Gwaza was killed.
There's a huge fear. I mean, when Boko Haram started, they actually targeted traditional rulers who had criticized them in the early days. So it had already created this fear that if you speak out against Boko Haram, most likely you put yourself at risk. So people are not willing to take that risk. Like you said, people are not willing to die for Nigeria just yet.
Why are people not willing to die for Nigeria, Fatima? Because what a great country. Come on. I mean, it's astonishing.
Lots have died for Nigeria. I think it's a great question that you ask. There are responsibilities in all 3 tiers of government and also within the communities. Everybody must do their bit. There are certain things that are the responsibility of the state governors. For example, education, poverty alleviation. They are, because we live in a federal system where the state governors have some responsibility to provide in succor for their own people, and they must do more. The federal government also must do more. We must also do better in terms of how we manage resources across the 3 tiers of government and how we work together across the 3 tiers of government. We cannot fight Boko Haram without traditional rulers, without political rulers, without religious rulers, without the community. And one of the things that we're doing in our program is to find bridges where we can all come together as a country, because if we don't unite as a country and if everybody doesn't do their bit, no matter how hard, people have spoken out and have been killed, but there are a lot of people who are more, these days, more and more willing to speak out, and more of these critical voices must come to the fore.
Would you concede that this is a stalling point, though, the distrust between northern state governments and the federal government? Because politicians there suggest that Goodluck is frankly paranoid, or is at least advised by paranoid people.
As the federal government, the onus is on us to reach out to people and to build those bridges of trust. We must do a better job in terms of getting people to trust the government. Again, it's not just northern governors, it's also lots of different communities, not just in the north, but probably in the west and in the east. So
I just want to I'm sorry to interrupt you, Fatima. I think I always feel very, very saddened, you know, and this is not a reflection on your person. It's a reflection on people in power in Nigeria. When they say communities are not doing enough, it strikes me like I think the fact that we're in a civilized society stops me from slapping anyone that says communities are not doing enough. I'm not talking about you in a person. I'm talking about...
Sincerely hope not.
I'm saying...
I'll have to sit between you in a moment.
Let's picture this. Let's picture this. And just put yourself in this situation. We have a people terrorized by armed men. And for, at least for the past 3 years, and beyond that, they've had their women raped. They've had their families killed. I met with a medical doctor who told me I joined Boko Haram out of choice. And I asked him why, and it's on YouTube, and he said, because I was in Abuja as a medical doctor, and he went home, and his only brother, he came home, and the mother said he'd been taken away by the military. And he went to the military barracks, and they said he's been killed. And this medical doctor willingly joined Boko Haram. Now, this community on their own form vigilante groups. You should have read about JTF, civilian JTFs, with machetes and torchlights against armed insurgents. And we say these communities are not doing enough. And it's in this same community that sheikhs, imams have been killed, leading Islamic clerics have been murdered. Just recently, an Islamic cleric and his wife and 5 children were killed right there in the mosque. It is the government that needs to up its game so that the people can join halfway. And I'm sick and tired of our government, saying the fact that you are a Nigerian in itself is a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice, that the fact that Nigerians are pushed to the wall, and rather than fight back, they break the wall to find an escape route, it's more than enough sacrifice by our people. It's the government that just needs to meet us halfway. If you go into the bush and you look at your back and you see the military commander behind you, then you move forward. And the core problem, Fatima, is that our government should get away from the denial and move forward and meet the people halfway. And then there could be a solution to this issue.
Okay, Fatima definitely needs a right to reply on that one, but I'm not going to give you them because we're going to move on because there are some more questions that we need to get asked. There's a very patient gentleman right down here in the corner. Yeah, two or three more, and then I think we'll have to wind up.
My name is David Hogarth, and I spent about 8 years in the 70s in Sokoto, which is in the northwest corner of Nigeria, unsuccessfully trying to promote Boko, which means Western education, in case anybody doesn't know. My question is double, really. First of all, do you think that Boko Haram is associated with any one particular people in Nigeria? And the Kanuri people spring to mind a little bit, because they're in that part of the world. And the second one is, what does the panel think is the sort of feeling in a largely Muslim village away from the northeast, in Kano, in Sokoto, and even perhaps in Kwara State and in the southwest among Muslims? Do they feel a thrill of pride, or do they feel a thrill of horror, as we do?
Thank you. Who would you like to have answer that?
Anybody wishes to.
Who'd like to take a stab? The first point first, the Kanuri question I find very interesting. Kuri, you have dominated. It would be nice to hear some other people say.
This information, we've had Yoruba Boko Haram members. We actually have a Yoruba man standing trial in the United States who is a member and supplier and enabler of Boko Haram. We've had an Ijaw person captured and being tried is with the SSS by Boko Haram. It's an ideology that spreads along, but it's true that majority of its members come from a northern part of Nigeria, but it's spreading along the regions.
Well, I would concur in that Boko Haram has members across a lot of Muslims. There's a lot of sympathizers, and they have members from across ethnic groups. But currently, 85% of the membership are actually Kanuri. Currently, yes.
Sorry.
Thought about what people feel when Muslims across Nigeria, do they feel those sort of sense of pride?
It has changed. When Boko Haram first emerged, there was sympathy for them from a lot of Muslims who really did connect with that kind of ideology that they espoused at first, which was a purer kind of discipline as a Muslim. But now it really has so little to do with Islam that most Muslims are just horrified.
I mean, isn't that the thing? They basically out-Taliban the Taliban and sort of some of the stuff they've done. I mean, it's really vicious. And do you not feel that if you can isolate some of the pure Yusufi lot off, that the other brigade will just collapse? Might that not just happen? Sorry, Andrew,
Go ahead, Andrew, you want to say something?
Sorry, I mean, one of the great unanswered questions about Boko Haram is why is it happening in Maiduguri and not in Kano, for example? Why have they not been able to, even though they've attacked Kano severally, and there's been talk about popular kind of in the early days of popular feeling in the Kano streets, they haven't had the grip as they have in Maiduguri, and it's one of the things that.
And what's your answer to that? Why do you think?
Well, it's because it's in that location was because of the strength of Yusuf's preaching, because of his own charisma and how his charisma descends through the generations of leaders, that hasn't been able to spread into other places, and partly possibly because of this Kanuri question, that in Kano, Kanuris are under suspicion, they're now pushed out of society, and it's kind of rooted to the northeast. However, the northwest is now having its own problems because of the generalized lack of security. Everything else is breaking down. Large migration patterns that normally went through the northeast are now diverted, going through the northwest. Increased settler pastoral conflicts are happening now in the northwest and all the way down through Kwara into Ilori and all this kind of stuff, and it's causing so much problems that initial kind of initial feeling of support that was initially there, like in those early days in Kano streets, has completely faded away, and I would be surprised to find anybody who's.
Okay, can we just take a couple more questions? There's very persistent hand going up here in the front row. Yes, madam. There's a microphone coming.
Yes. My name is Taiwo, and I am the founder of Art of Life Foundation, the first grief counseling initiative that was done in Nigeria 10 years ago. And I just wanted to confirm what Fatima said, that we have been working quietly with the Murtala Muhammad Foundation in that initiative that she talked about of grief counseling, the people that are going through tremendous trauma that this has led to. And it's not only a theory, we are doing it. And it does exist in Nigeria. We're even actually doing telephone counseling that we want to take.
And have you been working with any of the relatives of those
yes.
girls in Chibok?
We have. Yeah. No, not Chibok.
Not Chibok.
No, we haven't reached their own. We just, because this happened a few weeks ago. But I also want to state what actually has frightened me most in this discussion, which is this idea of cells all over Nigeria and the franchising. Because as Kayode rightly said, the potential in every part of Nigeria is great. In the north, you had, and for different reasons, mainly poverty. In Lagos, we have area boys. In southeast, in the Delta, I can just imagine if there ever became an alliance of these anarchists, because that's really what they are. And, basically, the ones in Lagos would do it for the money. The ones in the Delta are doing it for the money. And they got into their head that they could basically take away our rights and, our funds and seize government, because there is lack of security all over Nigeria. That scares me. And I would like Kayode, since he seems to have a grip on what is, and any of the panelists to comment on that.
Okay, well, let's just keep it brief for a second. If you could bear that in mind, and we'll have, there's a lady in the front row here that I'd just like to take a question from, and then there's too many hands. Okay, go on, ask away.
This is actually a question to you, yourself as a journalist. I've been quite amazed how, from the beginning of the Chibok kidnappings, how the media has been quite coloured. It's been a one-sided story from the very beginning. Everyone went down on the government. Now, Jonathan could possibly be accused of not being a very good speaker, and not speaking up, arguably so. But no one is asking the other questions or even trying to. How can these thugs that we see on the YouTube videos, how can they coordinate quite sophisticated attacks only days apart? Where are the money coming from? All the recruitment. They're being recruited $3,000 in cash. Where's that money coming from? All the shipments. Now, there's a big difference between asking the communities to stand up against these assailants, absolutely. But there's also a difference between Buhari coming out talking about, inflammatory statements. You can only vote Muslim. Who was asking those questions?
Okay, can I tell you somebody who's in this room who has been asking those questions? And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to put your question to him to answer. The Sunday Telegraph's correspondent, Colin Freeman, is sitting over there. Now, he's a man who I know has not only been out in Nigeria recently, but also has been up long before many other journalists were up there asking those very questions of Boko Haram. Colin, we're under the spotlight ourselves here. Journalists are not asking the right questions of the right people.
So what was the question? Yeah, it's obviously very easy to, when this situation happens, to lay into a government like Nigeria's. You start saying, why didn't they have this kind of response? Why didn't they have that kind of response in very pacey fashion? Clearly, Nigeria has all kinds of problems, and something like this is going to highlight those problems, and that's probably why we do report on it, to show this is what happens when you have a dysfunctional government. These awful, disastrous situations arise. I think that's probably about enough for me.
But one of the things you raised there was that we criticise Goodluck Jonathan for his slow response. Boko Haram is, we actually don't know that much about how they get their guns and their money. We know there are allegations of corruption, but there are also stories about guns moving across borders, links with Al-Qaeda groups, Shabab, training, and all this sort of stuff. How much are we actually asking these questions as journalists? Are you reporting on that?
Yeah, we try. We blog. I blog occasionally on these matters. The blogs don't always get very many hits, to be honest. It's a minority subject. Until the Bring Our Girls Back campaign, Nigeria, frankly, within the Western media, was a bit of a minority subject. You have a huge Nigerian diaspora in this country. I don't know how many. Maybe it's 250,000, maybe it's 1 million. It's a big diaspora, a big English-speaking diaspora with strong colonial links. Not like somewhere like Somalia, we have direct colonial connections. How often do you read about things going on in Lagos, in Abuja, or anywhere else in Nigeria, in the UK media? Not very often. And that is just, it's off radar for us. It's not because people in Britain don't care about what happens in the rest of the world. It's just not on the radar. It takes a catastrophic event like this to start bringing people to find out about the country. And, also that may indirectly focus the attention of other governments around the world, the West, etc., to start thinking, hang on, we've really got a problem with these Boko Haram people. It's on the news now. We need to do something about it.
Okay, Colin, I'm sorry about the Boko Haram style ambush there on you, but can I just take two other questions, which I just want to use the fact that we've got our panel here. Two questions, gentleman in the middle and right here at the front as well. Can we do both at the same time?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Toby Ali Balogun. I'm a Nigerian living in the UK at the moment. And I just want to talk about the situation from the diasporan perspective and look at it from those Nigerians based here, looking back home and looking at things on the ground. And I think for me, what's most troubling is I visit Nigeria once or twice a year, and I went back in December, and things on the ground were nervous. I think looking at Nigeria now with the election coming up next year and everything happening, it's a shame that this has not been dealt with decisively. I think for me, the questions being asked are, what are the government doing? It's evident that there are a lot of factors at play. Given the nature of the attacks, the frequency, given the fact that the girls are missing, there's so much international attention on Nigeria at the moment. Boko Haram are still attacking, and for the fact that they can attack somewhere like Abuja, the federal capital, the seats of government, is worrying. And also the nature of the attitude taken by people in Nigeria. I come from Lagos, so when I'm there, I hear the way a lot of my friends speak about the conflicts, and they deflect it as if to say it is a northern affair, but they also say Boko Haram will never dare attack Yoruba land or come into Lagos or else. And that is worrying because that adds another dynamic to the situation here. And it makes it more of a sectarian thing, an ethnic thing. And
Sure. It's often the case for someone who lives outside, you know, a national of a country who then lives outside it. Yeah. It's a frightening thing to see it.
And in addition to that, you're looking at the news and the media, you're looking at what's current. This is the centenary of Nigeria. This is this year, 2014, is the centenary, and it's been marred by everything. We're looking at the petroleum officer, minister, what happened with the Central Bank of Nigeria. We're looking at the pardons Jonathan has given. You're looking at the state of the country, and you're looking at comments made by
Toby, we'll get the panel's comments on your sense of things, of what's going on there and what's happening.
I think to sum up what I'm saying, for us looking in, it's disappointing, and we know there are other factors at play, and this situation could have been nipped in the bud earlier. Obasanjo dealt with the same thing, and it wasn't as severe. He addressed it very quickly. We just want some decisive action done, and we want Nigeria.
On that as well. Thank you. If we could, let's just get the microphone down to the front here. We'll get one more question at the same time.
Okay. I'm Caroline. I'm a freelance journalist, and I work in and on Africa, more predominantly in Central Africa. But I want to take it back to what was raised over there and what just came up just now, which is all those backstories of the linkages and the external elements that play into this. I don't work in Nigeria. I work in Central Africa, as I said. But I see a lot, for instance, Mr. Boko Haram, let's call him. No, Mr. Boko Haram, that's his Twitter handle, Jacob Zen.
Oh, right, yes.
The US research on all of this and some of the very tenuous linkages they make, which then feed into foreign policy responses in Africa. I have been I'm very interested in borders and how things travel, and I'm very interested in those fuzzy lines between citizen, soldier, criminal, state.
Caroline, can I ask you to ask the question?
Yeah. So, my question to you guys is, how does this play into it? Because, as we said, we've got this rebel group, we've got this very localised situation, we've got this bigger state situation. But what about this stuff? What about these borders with Chad, etc., and Cameroon? And the situation in Car, for instance?
Okay, so let me put those two things. First of all, whoever would like to comment, Toby is concerned as a Nigerian living in this country at what he sees as his country going to the dogs, essentially, and he's worried, rightly?
Very much so. I think Kadi, hit the nail on the head when he says the biggest problem in Nigeria is corruption. I think that's really the biggest problem. And the responsibility, she said that why can't a leader like Buhari say something? And the bottom line is that the government is responsible for our security in Nigeria, nobody else. And all the power is with the presidency. The state governors are security officers only by name. They sometimes, state governments are forced to fund police operations because policemen don't have enough funding from the federal government. And I think that's why the Southwest keeps on saying, or some states keep on saying, that there's a need for state police. Because if I have the responsibility of being the chief security officer of my state, then I should have the powers that go along with it, which doesn't exist in Nigeria. So.
Okay, Bala, just hang on a second. Fatima, there are the problems with corruption, the problems with the police. All these problems have been highlighted. We've talked about a lot of them tonight. Caroline came up with further what Colin was saying earlier. You've got these porous borders which you can't even control. You don't know what's going on and what's coming over them. How can you talk about wanting to sort of educate people? And I mean, I'm not pouring scorn on the plans because I think they're laudable, as everyone has said. But how will that work if this other stuff is going on?
Let me just put it this way. I think when we first become confronted with this kind of militancy, there was a state of unpreparedness. That is quite obvious. We have an army that were not really trained and positioned to fight this kind of insurgency. And the numbers of our army are quite small compared to what we require. We have the army involved in maintaining internal peace in 28 states of the country. Then you have an insurgency where you actually require the army. So what they have having to do is recruit massively. To recruit and train soldiers, it's not a day affair. It takes time. So we have a problem with our borders. We have very porous borders, and there's about 2,000 kilometers across that northeast. What we are now doing is to do joint border management with our neighbors in Cameroon, Chad, and Niger that we share borders with. And again, we have started joint patrols with Cameroon, and those took a while to set up. But beyond that, there are also communities that are really marginalized that live across those border areas. So they allow people to come in and out. And that goes back to the point of what is the role of communities. Of course, we do need communities to cooperate with us because they give us intelligence and they tell us what's going on and they flag early warning signs. So there are many reasons why communities must work with government. And now there is a program and there is a plan that will engage these communities across the border. A lot of our programs started 2 years ago. These things take a while to plan, to implement, so there is a lot of skepticism because you're not seeing them today. But you won't see them today. You hopefully in another 2-3 years, some of that capacity will be built. We had to build a whole capacity in the area of intelligence gathering, intelligence sharing across agencies. We have to build structures that allow us to collaborate across agencies, and that is not unique to Nigeria. America had these problems after 9/11 where they found that different agencies operated as silos and they had to come together. So we're there. I mean, when you look at other countries who have faced these kind of insurgencies, you must understand that these things are not easy. They don't take it's not an overnight solution. Some countries are dealing with it for 30 years, 40 years, and we hope that that will not be the case for us.
All right, a plea for understanding, a note of hope. Look, there are a lot, I think we should end it there. There are a lot of other hands and a lot of unanswered questions, I know, and I'm sorry, but I'm getting the frontline eye here about the watch. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of these panelists. They've been fantastic. Bala from SOAS, Andrew Walker, journalist and blogger, and Kayode, voracious blogger himself, and I think most of all I'd like to thank Fatima here, who's taken a lot of flack, who's also, as I remind you, stayed 24 hours beyond what her original plan was to be here for this tonight. And thank you all for coming, and I'm sure these lot would love to be attacked with more questions privately. So.